first impression that comes to our mind about any college: tall buildings, big classrooms, large lobby areas, thick books, IT labs, assignments, class tests, and projects. Nothing besides that. Every hour, minute, second spent here help us carving and shaping our persona, cultivating innovative mindsets for the challenging world. Learning is a lifelong process. Sharing knowledge, inculcating values of life, spark the innovative horizons of mind. Fun and frolic is the nature of every nook and corner here. A daily dose of thrill, we are sure to get here.
DMU was established as a DMU was established as an institution for the entire community to come together and excel. We have students who come and learn in a very good facility. We have faculty who are not just well qualified and competent, but are also constantly motivated to teach their best and also pursue research. For well-wishers to come here, for intellectuals to have a place here and contribute in this mission of providing the best education to their minds in all the courses that we offer: law, media, and management. In making this happen, as the management, we're constantly trying to improve our facilities. Our infrastructure is international in nature. We've tried to bring together all the relevant stakeholders to participate in this mission. We've tried to ensure that the workings and processes of this institute are fundamentally sound. It is our hope that those who have the desire to succeed find a place over here and pursue this goal of excellence. We motivate all of them in achieving this task. If you're associated with DME or wish to get associated, then I welcome you all over here and I wish you all the best.
Delhi Metropolitan Education is a young college. We are 6 years old. We were established in 2013, but during these 6 years, we have established our own parameters, and this college was ranked among the top 25 law colleges in India. Well, the management school also was ranked as fourth among the upcoming business schools. uh, we work on a model in this college, and that model is, say, the KSA model. We work on the knowledge enhancement of the student, we work on the skill enhancement, and we work on the attitude enhancement. And our model says that if a student has got the appropriate knowledge, skills, and attitude, corporates are waiting for you. The whole world is waiting for you. So, as far as enhancing knowledge is concerned, we have a battery of excellent teachers. We have an excellent library with a lot of online journals and books. We have classrooms whereby we deliver through the technological mode. We have ERP systems. So this is the knowledge enhancement part. Coming to the skill enhancement parts, we have industrial visits, we have workshops, conferences, seminars, film festivals, judges coming to the campus. So all this enhances the skill level of the students. And as far as attitude is concerned, we work on that so that a student is corporate ready. Means the corporate needs people who are ready to deliver. So we have to work on the attitude of the students as well. And having worked on the knowledge, skill and attitude parameters, we ensure that at the end of the course, the student is having a job offer in hand. This is the DME work.
Mr. James, please unmute yourself. A pop-out must be coming.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I can't see you. Can you switch on your video? Mr. James, can you hear me?
I sent a message to start the video.
Okay, I'll just call him also. Mr. James, can you hear me? Yeah, can you switch on your video?
See, like both of us have checked in from our own device. Hello.
Okay.
So Anjali has already checked in, but she's not able to.
Yes, what's the problem?
That says video mute and unmute.
Yeah, I'll do that.
That's not showing up. You just came for a second, yeah.
Ma'am, you must be receiving a pop-out.
There's nothing. No.
It's my distance.
Now it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I've just unmute.
Yeah.
So have you got it now?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I can't see your video.
Yeah. So that's the issue. Is why.
And if we have two devices in one room, it will create problem of echoing.
No. He's just.
Yeah.
Just go out. So mine is showing recording, which I don't need, right? Okay. I've set my video. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Now I can see you.
Pop up this came. James, ask him to give me a cup of tea, please. Yeah.
So,
okay. You can see me now?
Yes, ma'am. I can see you. Can we start with your permission?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon, everybody. I, Navjot Suri, Assistant Professor Law at DME, welcome you all to today's webinar organized by DME Law School on the topic Youth and HIV/AIDS in India, in conversation with Anjali Gopalan ma'am. Anjali Gopalan ma'am is an Indian human rights and animal rights activist, founder and executive director of NAS Foundation, an NGO dedicated to fight against the HIV/AIDS epidemic in India, mainly focused on women and children. In 2012, Time placed Miss Anjali Gopalan on its list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Anjali ma'am has worked for nearly a decade with the community-based organizations in New York City, where she worked for the migrants from Southeast Asia who lacked valid documents. She later started the NAS Foundation that changed the lives of LGBT and women and children, those who live with HIV positive, providing direct services for the HIV, AIDS, and marginalization circumstances led her to live and care for HIV affected people who had undocumented migrant. They were lacking with the documents which were required. When Ma'am returned to India, she established Delhi's first HIV clinic in 1994 and the NAS Foundation India Trust. And with the foundation at present, the foundation is working for on the issues of sexuality rights. Her main concern remains in providing quality care to those living with HIV infection, which she has done through founding and managing a care home for HIV positive children and women. As a strong advocate for the sexual health and rights of LGBT community, she also spearheaded the 8-year legal battle against Section 377 of Indian Penal Code. In 2001, her organization filed a public interest litigation to decriminalize homosexuality and put an end to the archaic law under which individuals were harassed and discriminated against based on their sexual orientation. The Delhi High Court ruled in favor of NAS India in 2009 and declared 377 an infringement on individual rights. And this happened only by appealing by the foundation in the Delhi High Court. And finally, with the recent judgment by the Supreme Court in case of Navtej Singh Johar, we have come to an end to this. We have decriminalized, the Supreme Court has decriminalized Section 377. With regard to the awards and recognition, ma'am has received the Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur in 2013, received the Women Achiever Award from Government of India 2007, received the Commonwealth Award in 2001. In 2014, the Limca Book of Records placed Anjali ma'am in People of the Year. Actor Nutan Surya played the role of Anjali ma'am in Aligarh movie that was released in 2016. The Academic Committee of Shrishti Madurai awarded Miss Anjali Gopalan Shrishti Awards for Social Justice Journalism. I have a lot more to say, but with the constraint of the time, I will be ending the introduction here. I welcome you, ma'am, and it is indeed an honor for us to have you as a guest speaker for today's webinar. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Ravi Kant Swami, Director DME, Professor Dr. N.K. Behel, Dean DME Law School, and Professor Dr. Bhavesh Gupta, Head Academics, DME Law School, who will be moderating this session. I welcome all the participants. I'm sure you will all will have an enriching experience and will gain valuable knowledge in today's webinar. Now, ma'am, it's over to you. You can start with the session.
So today you wanted to this session. Are people going to be asking questions?
Yes, ma'am, in the end.
Okay. So because I think what would make very good sense is if people start thinking about the questions they want to ask. And because I don't really want to do a lecture, it doesn't make sense. I would rather be answering questions that are concerning young people, because HIV has been around for a very long time. And obviously, one of the hardest hit people are young people. And I also think it's really unfortunate that we haven't been able to stop the spread of this infection in spite of having all the information that we do. And a lot of it has to do with, I think we haven't been, and this is the responsibility of people in positions of authority and power who haven't reached out enough to the young people to give them information. Because now when I look around, even a city like Delhi, which is the capital of this country, I find there is no information available to anybody, right? And the information that is available used to be available. At least there were some boards, there was something happening on TV, etc., etc. All of that seems to have disappeared. We still don't have sex education in the school system, which I think is a huge mistake, because there is age-appropriate information which needs to be shared with young people. Unfortunately, adults somehow feel that if there is sex education, our children are going to become promiscuous, which is not true. I think we need to learn to respect the young, because I think if people are given the right information, they make the right choices. If you understand the consequences of your actions, is when you learn to protect yourself. Somehow I feel that the information that is out there also for young people, there is no one to really discuss it with and clarify doubts. So I'm hoping that today's session will allow for some of that to happen. Somehow people still, in spite of years and years of telling them how the infection spreads and how it doesn't, what they can do to protect themselves, there is still a lot of confusion around it. I still get, for example, I still get a lot of questions around, can I get infected from mosquito bites? And we all know, I mean, intellectually, many of us know that we cannot get infected from mosquito bites. But if you scratch the surface a little bit, you'll find that people don't really believe the information that they get. So when I do sessions, one of the things, this question always comes up, and the way I respond is very simple. I'm like, okay, what makes you think that mosquito bites can infect you? Because it has something to do with blood, right? And then what one really needs to understand is it's not enough to say you won't get infected, but to understand that mosquitoes, it's a human immunodeficiency virus. It will spread from human to human. It cannot go from human into mosquito and then back into human. So actually when you start peeling the layers is when you realize that a lot of our responses come from fear of the unknown, or not believing authorities in some way or the other, right? So I would really tell people that the more if you have these kind of fears and doubts, it's very important to reach out to people like us, and we'll always respond to you to clarify these doubts. The whole issue around the fact that there isn't enough information out there for the young is really problematic, because in the last few years, ever since we started this work, one of the things that has prompted me to continue doing this kind of work is the fact that no matter how much money has been spent on prevention, we still see a lot of young women especially come in infected. And I'm talking about women who are about 18, 19, sometimes 17, 16, because they're married off at that age, right? So they come to us infected. This is their first sexual partner. They get infected, and their response to us always is, but I've had only one partner. So the issue is, how does one, as a young person, learn to negotiate safe spaces for oneself? How does one understand that we are not trying to be judgmental or telling you not to have sex, but to understand and learn how to have safer sex is very critical. Because once you get infected, then you are infected for life. But having said that, that's not the end of the road. Because today, with the kind of drugs that are available, it is important to know your status, which you can't do if you don't get tested. Once you know your status, you can start medications that will keep you healthy for a much longer time. So it's not a death sentence. And I will definitely tell people that if you if you suspect that you may have been exposed, it's very important to get tested, because the drugs that are available will give you will allow you to lead a normal, healthy life. So these are things that you need to always remember, and that you can be a very productive human being. Just because you're HIV positive doesn't mean you stop working, you stop enjoying life. It's not the end of the road, as I keep saying. So young people need to understand that they have to get the right information. They have to learn to protect themselves. This is an acquired infection. So if they learn how to protect themselves, they are not going to get infected. And unlike, for example, COVID, we're living in the time of COVID, right? Look how contagious this infection is. It's brought us all down to our knees, right? We've forgotten what life is like anymore. And it's only been 3 months of living like this. But HIV is something which is there, but it's not contagious like COVID. It is something that is of course can be transmitted from one individual to the other. But thank God that the way of transmission is so specific. It has to be a closed, penetrated contact. Unlike COVID, where you're sniffing and snorting and whatever and spitting and all of that, and you can get infected. So HIV is something that you can really protect yourself from. Yeah. So are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am, we've got a lot of questions. So I'll start with the first question that I think, what I think is, this is my perspective, that I think the education regarding this should start from the home itself. The parents should be the first, you can say the first people, I mean, the ones who should tell their child that, you know, this kind of thing is there and you need to protect yourself. And during the time when they're reaching to their age, you know, so they have to keep all these things in their mind. So I think parents should be the first one to guide the, you know, the what, and then should come the role of the school and college.
Okay. In the ideal world, yes, of course. Which means you have to have a kind of relationship with your child, or the child with the parent, where they can talk to each other openly. But my experience shows me that because this is predominantly a sexually transmitted infection, and there are such moral connotations to it, invariably I find parents are not so comfortable talking to their kids about it, which is unfortunate. But also, parents very often don't have all the information that they should for the child. That's one. Secondly, the whole system, I think, is stacked against young people, because our schools still don't have sex education. The issue around HIV is because it has such tremendous moral connotations to it. Many people don't want to talk about it. Teachers don't want to talk about it. Young kids have to learn from each other, and your peers only know as much as you know. So the space has never been created for this kind of sharing to happen, which is why people like me have been begging the government to allow for age-appropriate sex education to be there in the school system. But our politicians and our authorities have always felt that if we start teaching our young people sex education for young people, they'll become promiscuous, which is not true, because there is age-appropriate information that can be given to everyone. If I talk to someone who is a 5-year-old as opposed to someone who's 15, it's going to be very different in the way that I give them information. Few years ago, UNICEF had done a study where they found that sexual abuse in India, sexual abuse of children, was extremely high. They had come up with something like a number like 70 or 80% of children are abused in some way or the other. So I feel so strongly that from the time a child can understand, we should teach them about a wrong touch and a right touch. The child should know that if it comes to the parent will be really supportive and will believe the child. Because these are issues that we deal with every day. Parents don't want to believe that the maid or the driver touched the child in a certain way, or that an uncle or a cousin tried to do something to them. So unless parents themselves learn and understand how important it is, I don't think we're going to be able to progress much. Teachers are also a product of their environment. They're not comfortable talking about sex and sexuality with young people. As a matter of fact, many teachers I worked with have said, we have to see these students every day. Imagine now you want me to tell them about safer sex practices, etc. How will I face them every day? Therefore, we feel it's very important that teachers are trained to be able to talk on these issues. So it has to be part of the teaching curriculum. It needs to be included in that. So there are so many things that still need to be done, which hasn't happened. And it's unfortunate because I think such a preventable disease, we should not have any young person get infected today, but that's not true. Young people are still getting infected, and therefore they really need to learn to protect themselves.
So there's one student who's saying that in colleges or in schools, we don't have any such subject, or the teaching is not done with respect to this. And talking to our parents is really difficult, and we think that will they understand or not. So from where we should go and read it or listen, or we should get the information that how we need to protect ourselves and what exactly is HIV and what are the activities which are leading to this problem.
So I would like to, yes, I totally understand, and that's exactly what I've been saying. Teachers, parents, all these responsible adults in our lives may not be the people we can access, right? And they may not have enough information also. So of course, one of the ways to do it is to reach out to people like organizations like us, because there are many who are working on HIV prevention, and we should be able to give you that information. The government of India has a helpline that you can access. I don't know how good or bad they are, but definitely I would recommend that you reach out to people, to organizations like NAS Foundation. And one of the things I can recommend to the college itself is that every year when you have your new students come in, we would be happy to do a session with them on the basics of HIV. So that they understand it, and at least they have the knowledge not to expose themselves, right? And this is something we can definitely look at doing together. But please feel free to reach out to groups and organizations who have been working on these issues, because they will be able to give you that information. There is no other, unfortunately, no. Now, a lot of us use the internet a lot. And I find, of course, Google does help to a large extent, but it also scares you, because it's like getting too much information without really understanding. And therefore, then you start imagining, and then you panic and you think that you're infected because that's how Google works and that's how our heads work. So it's very important that you do have access to groups like ours where we can, and you can call us, we have a helpline. I'll be happy to, you can write in to me. I'll be happy to respond if there's anything that you're not clear about. Yeah.
There is one more question from one of the student that, ma'am, you have fought for homosexuals and you have also put a PIL in the High Court. So what kind of challenges you have faced, or the stereotypes you must have faced at that time? Because you are an Indian woman and there are a lot of pressure, must be a lot of pressure on you, and even people would have been there to, criticize you. And how you tackled that?
Okay, so let me start with that last bit first, because that's the easiest bit. I think many of us do the work we do because we really believe in what we do. we really want to, we really believe, at least I do, that all of us should have access to a just and equitable society. I mean, for me, nothing is more important, and it's not just humans, also animals are within that framework, right? Uh, and yes, it was difficult, but there were times, when you do the kind of work we do, you have to develop a very thick skin. That's rule number one, because the world will say a lot of things. So you have to have enough confidence in yourself and the ability not to bother or not to care, and therefore to care about what the bad that the world says about you. And yes, you're right. As a woman, of course, it's an issue, right? And especially as a single woman, they're like, what are you getting out of this? And what about your sexuality? So I was like, yeah, come on. I mean, what am I going to get out of it? मुझे कोई prize तो नहीं मिलने वाला. So, but the point is, one sees that when you discriminate against someone, you are living in a world that is even more unequal. And not only are you discriminating, you are living in a democracy, and you're denying rights to your own citizens. And why should any of us sit back and take that quietly, right? So yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with your belief in yourself and your belief in what you're doing, and also the kind of support you get. If there are many people who have been very negative with me, there have been many who have been extremely encouraging and who have stood by me right along the way. So it's never one-sided. And clearly, for me, it was also an issue of the kind of values you bring up young people with. As a child, I was brought up to respect diversity. My parents had gay friends who would come home. So I was exposed to this right from the time I was really young. I can't imagine ever saying something negative about anyone who is perceived to be different. Or as children, we have to learn to respect. It's a very learned behavior. It's a very taught behavior. Adults, and therefore you as young people, and for those younger ones who are coming into your life, you have to remember, we have to learn how not to disrespect on caste and class lines. It's so easy in our culture because we are so stratified on caste and class lines that we don't even realize how easily we discriminate because someone is of a different religion or a different gender or a different class or a different caste. It's something that's there in our environment. So therefore, how do we become aware of it, and how do we learn to fight it? These are things that I hold adults responsible to teach our young. And I'll share an episode here. I run a home for children who are orphaned. So I remember once I was sitting, and two of the kids came back from school, and they were talking about some other classmate of theirs, and they said something like, "Wo chakka hai." And my first response was, "Oh my God, these are children I'm bringing up, and I'm working on issues of homosexuality, and my own child here is calling someone a chakka." So my immediate reaction was one of sheer anger. And then I realized I have to stop being a child. And I didn't know, I said, I need to think about how to deal with this. So I think one of the few times I got one of my brilliant ideas. I actually hired two people from the community to be the care workers. And what does a care worker do? The care worker ensures that when you're sick and someone has to sit in the hospital with you, the care worker does it. They ensure that you take all your homework is done, your tiffin is made, you're going to school on time. All of that is the care workers. So after I hired these two, and then suddenly after a couple of years, I've never after that heard any negative statement about the LGBTQI community from any of my children. And they haven't done it because I've told them it's wrong. I just showed them that that they're no different from anybody else. They also can love and care and all of that and are worthy of your respect. So it's how does one make the switch in one's head that becomes important.
So, ma'am, students are keen of getting the knowledge that what are the activities which lead to HIV, and we should be aware, and we should have knowledge about it.
Yeah. So listen, the way you get HIV.
Your volume is a little. Your voice is not clear.
Okay, should I put on these earphones and see if it's better? I don't know if it will be better for you, but let me try. Technology is really new technology. It's a generational thing, man. 1 second. Women are used to get used to all this weird. Acha, wait. I don't know if this makes it
Yes,
better.
ma'am. Now it's better.
Oh, so I'm finally learning to conquer technology. Acha, kahan the hum log? The question was, how can one get infected?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
See, the routes of infection are very specific. You can get infected through unprotected penetrative sex with an infected person. It's not that because you're having sex, you're getting infected, but if you have sex with an infected person without protection, which means condoms, you can get infected. So that's one route of transmission. The other is mother to child, either when the mother is having the baby or through breast milk. So usually when a woman who is HIV positive, and now with the kind of drugs that are available, the chances of transmission have come down to as low as 1%. If the woman is on specific drugs, and we recommend that she does not breastfeed for the first 6 months, then the chances of transmission are literally 1%. These are then mother to child transmission, breast milk, through blood transfusion. That's another route of transmission. Now, in the case of blood transfusion, is none of us, you usually have a blood transfusion when you have an issue, a blood-related issue, or if you have a disease, which is where you need regular transfusion of blood. It's very important to get the blood from a licensed blood bank because they test for many infections, including HIV. Now, the one thing, sometimes you hear of cases that I had blood that was tested and I still got infected. That happens occasionally, and it can happen if the blood is in what is known as the window period. That is, the test for HIV is an antibody test. So what are antibodies? Antibodies are those, when you are exposed to an infection, your body naturally mounts an antibody response to fight that infection. And then it goes into a memory bank so that when that infection happens again, it doesn't take time to respond. And the antibodies for HIV takes anywhere from initially 3 weeks to 3 months to come into action. That time period of 3 weeks to 3 months after infection is called the window period. And during that time, even if you test the blood, there's a possibility it will show up negative even though it is positive. So that risk is always there. That's why it's very important to get the blood from a licensed blood bank. These are the routes of transmission. There is no other route of transmission. So it's very specific in the manner that you get infected.
So there is a question that recently a judgment has been given by Kerala High Court that surrender cannot be construed as consent for sexual intercourse. Kerala High Court upholds conviction of 67-year-old for the rape of minor, which clearly shows that the victim feel fear. I mean, they feel that when they have to tell to anybody that whatever happened with them. So what is
No,
your
no,
take on that?
no. What was the last sentence? It wasn't clear.
Yeah. The Kerala High Court upholds conviction of 67-year-old for the rape of the minor, which clearly shows that the victim was in fear, and victims of rape fear a lot in telling whatever happened with them.
Arey bhaiya, this is like impossible to. You're going in and out. Uh, the Kerala High Court upheld the conviction of a 67-year-old. And what was the issue?
That is not clearly mentioned here. Basically, I think it's a case where it was held by the High Court that surrender cannot be construed as consent for sexual intercourse.
What cannot be construed as sexual
Surrender cannot be construed as consent.
Yes, because when you're in a situation when you cannot fight back, for example, the minor child, in this case, the minor child, had sex with this adult, right? This is what my understanding is from what you said. And the court basically said just because this minor had sex with the adult does not mean it is consent, which is true. Because when you're in a situation that is so violent and you cannot fight back and you do end up having sex with that individual, it does not mean that you have agreed to have sex, so therefore it is still rape. And anyway, an adult having sex with a minor, it is rape, even if there is consent. The law is clear on that. If you look at POCSO, it is very clear that even if a minor agrees to have sex, it will still be considered as rape.
Yes, we have
So
lot of judgments also on this.
Yes, there have been. And frankly, if you're having sex with anyone below 18, you are raping them, period.
Yeah.
So everyone needs to be clear on that one.
So the way we have POCSO Act, don't you think in a similar manner we should have some specific legislation which is working for the upliftment of LGBTQ community as well as for the people who are infected with HIV?
No, no. One is POCSO is where children are concerned, right?
Yes.
So your question is, should we have a specific law for LGBTQI? On what? On rape?
No, not on rape, specifically for protection of their rights or
absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen, the LGBTQI community has no rights. Period. What you have today is with the reading down of Section 377, all that has happened is that homosexuality has been decriminalized. That's all. That means you are the communities, homosexuals are no longer seen as criminals. Aap chor uchakke nahi ho. But do you have the right that all other citizens in this country take for granted? For example, one of the most common things we take for granted, we don't even think of it as a right, is the right to marry. So for those LGBTQI who want to get married, can they get married? No. Can they adopt? No. Can they get the benefits that of LTC in government jobs? They can't. Can they get benefits of spousal benefits? No. So any and every right that citizens in this country have, the LGBTQI community does not. So there are no rights.
This Transgender Act has been passed in 2019. So what is your comment on that? What it is specifically, I mean, what rights it's guaranteeing the transgender community?
Okay. I think it was a landmark judgment in many ways. Though the trans community has had a lot of issues around some of the clauses in that judgment. I think what has happened with that judgment is, and this is a situation most peculiar to our country, because the whole definition of trans itself, because transgender is a very Western term. We have no equivalent in our culture. the closest when we think of trans, we think of the Kinnar community, Hijras.
Yes.
Clarity on the definition of trans. That was one. Secondly, it also said that there should, for someone to be called trans, there has to be a committee that is set up. So for them to get the benefits of being trans, a committee has to decide whether someone is trans or not, which is really weird because if you're trans, it is here in your head. You know that you are trapped in the wrong body. It's not a physical manifestation in any way. It does not say that, okay, if you come to me, if I'm on the committee, how do I, if you tell me you're trans, I have to accept you're trans because I'm not looking for something that exists or something that should not exist. Because in your head, you know, in your very soul, you know that you belong to the other gender. So there were a lot of issues in this judgment that created more confusion. But the good thing is, at least the trans community was acknowledged and some benefits have accrued. So for example, Tamil Nadu, which has always been very progressive about this, recently had a trans person who was hired, who was a police officer. So yes, there are many benefits to this judgment, but there are lacunae too. Interestingly, this judgment only covers the trans people. They very clearly said that no lesbians, gay people, no intersex people should be part of this. Now, again, there's a lot of confusion between intersex and trans. That's another whole, so, you know, this kind of discussion really needs to happen in depth and people need to understand. Really, they need to unpack what all these definitions mean. And again, this is something I can definitely do once your college opens, is to do a session on this with you guys. Because I don't think we have enough time today to be able to go into those details.
Yes, ma'am. We can have a session in the orientation program with the new students who are coming up. Ma'am, there is a question from one of the faculty that are there any social research studies on whether homo and lesbian they're living together as married partners and that marriage has been a successful marriage or not?
I have lots of friends who have been married. I have conducted marriages in 95, 96 of my own staff. None of it is recognized, but they are living together. I have friends who have had children through surrogacy, which by the way is illegal now. A couple of years ago, it became illegal because suddenly government woke up and said, "Arey, there are too many homosexuals coming from other countries to have children through surrogacy here," so they've stopped it. But I know people who are living together, who have made a home for themselves, who have been in relationships for many years. What we need to understand is just like heterosexual people, homosexual people also love, live together, make a life together, can get divorced, can leave each other. There's no difference between homosexuals and heterosexuals when it comes to feelings, etc. So yes, there are many people who live together and have made a home together.
So we have a very important question by one of the participants that as a member of queer community, I would like to ask ma'am that what are the steps that NAS has taken in direction towards the injustice created towards the community referring to the inadequate amount of medical facilities we are provided?
Well, unfortunately, there are no, when you're talking about medical benefits, are you talking specifically about things like sex change operations, etc.? Or are you talking about, and please respond so that I can respond to this, are you talking about access to healthcare per se? Can you just flesh this question out a little bit?
Yeah, I've asked her. I've asked her to please
Yeah.
give a detailed version of.
But anyway, let me just try and do a general response to say that we have and will continue post lockdown to work with the medical profession to sensitize them to issues that affect the LGBTQI community. This is something we've been doing for years, and this is something we're committed to continue doing. But unfortunately, because the system is such, you don't have specific information targeted to the community. Doctors are not trained, for example, to look for specific infections which do affect the community, right? So it's an ongoing thing, which is why we are still trying to put a lot of pressure to include specific information on the LGBTQI issues in the curriculum, doctors training curriculum, because that's where the information needs to start from. That's where doctors have to, doctors need to be taught what to look for. They need to understand. For example, and this is true even for women. For example, if a woman is having a white discharge, she'll tell the doctor some other story. It's the same story with a lot of members of the LGBTQI community, because they don't know how they will be accepted by the doctor. And therefore, the attitude of the doctor is where the change needs to happen. And that is something NAS is very committed to doing and is continuing to do. But it's a very long process, and we need to have a system in place which ensures, and maybe the courts need to look at this, because the courts have already said that the government has to take the responsibility of ensuring that there is wider reach about these issues in the community. So unless this becomes a part of our educational system, that's when we are going to see changes. But it's a very slow and long process.
Absolutely, ma'am. So that is I've got a lot of questions from students, and they're posting the same issue, that we don't have a particular you can say a subject, or we don't have this education as a part of our curriculum, and that is the reason why we don't know exactly what is the difference between transgender, transsexuals, intersex persons, genderqueer. So we don't have any knowledge. So once we are not having any knowledge, so how
what
can we
do?
deal with it then? We
exactly.
need to have...
Agreed, totally. And that's why I've said that once this post-COVID, I don't know when that's going to happen, but definitely I make the commitment from my side to come to your college and do a session with you. Because this is something I've been doing all my life, and I keep thinking I should stop now, but then maybe not. So I'll be happy to come and do such a session, because I think a lot of the issue has to do with us not having correct and correct information. If you have information is when you're able to deal with issues. That's when you're able to understand what these differences mean and what your response should be. Because as future young lawyers, this community is highly marginalized and needs interventions. And therefore, as young lawyers, if you are open, a person from the community can come to you and ask for help only if they know that they're not going to be judged and laughed at, and that they would be taken seriously. And that can only happen if you have got that information which will allow you to be open to them. So I think the first step, the very fact that you all have expressed the need to even get information, I think is a huge step forward. And we should do a session once college opens. Absolutely, I'll be happy to come and do a session.
Ma'am, I would be happy to tell you that today we are having participants from different countries, and the professors were there in Dubai and some countries, the names which I also don't know, but we've got a huge amount of participation from those countries also. And I mean, we have around 300 participants attending this webinar, not only from our college, but across India and across the globe. Some of
Wonderful.
these, there is a small question which has come up recently, that when a person from a community is a hospital and they have to get admitted, so then there is a problem that in which ward we should kept that particular person, in the male or the
When
female
someone is
ward.
transgendered.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so the way I would look at it is the gender that that individual identifies with, which is a difficult one. For example, if they, of course, if they're pre-op and post-op, there's a lot of difference. So suppose it is a transgendered person who has transition. That means they've gone through the surgery and they are now either male to female or female to male, in which case they go into the ward that is meant for the male or the female, right? The hard part is for someone who hasn't transitioned, but in their head, with the worst thing for a person who is who is biologically male, but identifies as being female, they don't want to be in a male space. They're uncomfortable in a male space. But if they go into a female space, they are biologically male. So women have an issue with that. So it's a hard one. And I don't think there's an answer to that I am aware of. I can't tell you that this is how it should be, but I know the practice is that if someone is biologically male or female, they get put into those wards. There aren't special wards for trans people. So the closest I can come to is the whole issue of toilets. So how has, in many cultures and countries, what they've done is that they have what are called universal toilets, unisex toilets, toilets that can be used both by men and women. So that's one way. That means that you're not identifying a trans person and not creating a toilet which is meant only exclusively for men and women. So that's one way of doing it. And all of us are very open to suggestions and ideas, because this is something we really need to figure out, because I cannot tell you how difficult it is for a trans person to go into a space that they don't identify. Prisons is another area which is really problematic for trans people. Imagine you're a trans woman, but you're biologically male, and they put you into a male prison. It's awful. But unfortunately, that issue hasn't been resolved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've recently we have seen a lot of series on Netflix and also where this has been shown that what kind of harassment they face in prison. So
Yeah.
I can absolutely understand that. And ma'am, there's a question that what are basically the symptoms when a person is infected? What symptoms he or she has? I mean, what are the symptoms to
HIV.
identify that?
Yeah. Okay. So listen, the thing about HIV is once you get infected, for many years you may not have any symptoms, which is why many people who are infected don't know that they're infected, because usually you go to get a checkup that something is wrong when there are symptoms. So it takes as much as 8 to 10 years before you start showing symptoms. And what are those symptoms? Those symptoms are things like unexplained fevers for a long period of time, for about a month or so. Loss of weight when you're not trying to lose weight. Could be recurring infections with no reason. So, but if you think fevers, so, but these interestingly are also symptoms of many infections. So suppose I lose weight, I have fever all the time. It could be a symptom of TB. So unless you check for HIV, you don't know that it is HIV related. And so when would a doctor check for HIV? That he's looking at, or she's looking at all these parameters and saying, in spite of trying to deal with these issues, you're not getting okay. So let's do an HIV test. So that's when, so unless you test for HIV, you don't know that you have HIV, because the symptoms could be symptoms of other infections too. But definitely for many years, you will be what is called HIV positive asymptomatic. So suppose you know that you are HIV positive. So therefore, it's a good thing to know your status. If you get the test, you'll know that your status, and therefore, once you know that your CD4s are falling, you immediately get onto the meds, and then you live a much longer, healthier life. So knowing your status becomes very important. But don't panic and think that, oh, all of us should get an HIV test. No. The reason we do an HIV test is if we think we have been exposed. Suppose I have had unprotected sex and I don't know the status of my partner. Suppose I have had to have a transfusion and I don't know if the blood was properly tested. These are the times that I would get an HIV test.
Nowadays, hospitals have made it mandatory. Whenever you get admitted, they get the test done. So I think
for surgery.
Yeah. Like, no, even if you are admitted because of some pain or something, I myself got admitted for my issue, and then I just had an abdominal pain, but they did the test. So every hospital has,
I think, supposed to do it,
but
yeah, but they're not supposed to do it.
Oh my God!
God, crying out loud. I mean, it's
every
like I have a
time
stomach
they are doing
ache. Right. But they're not supposed to.
Oh, that's
but
the
clearly,
now which I've got it, so I'll be.
Yeah. But of course, okay. So suppose they say you need an HIV test. Did they do appropriate pre-test counseling? Did they do post-test counseling?
No.
So that is the issue. I don't.
Ma'am,
have a problem with the fact that you cannot take an HIV test without consent. That's the law. And you cannot do it without pre-test counseling and post-test counseling. Because what pre-test and counseling and post-test counseling does is it prepares you for an HIV result. Suppose you went in for a stomach ache and they did this HIV test and you were HIV positive. Imagine at that point they tell you are HIV positive and you're not going to admit it. The thing is not the HIV test. Are they doing it to deny services or are they doing it to enhance interventions?
No, they just do
they
it.
have your permission to do it.
Yeah. And they're doing it every time. Even if I'm getting admitted 5 times in a year, then again and again they are doing it. So
which is such.
That is money making, maybe.
I don't know what it is, but it's an illogical fear, and they should not do it. Even if they want to do the test, there has to be some logic behind doing the test. And they definitely need to do pre-test counseling because they have to prepare you for an HIV test. Most people we know, we've had cases where some people have committed suicide. Absolutely avoidable. And I hold the healthcare professionals responsible for that. I see them as abetting suicide. You know that? It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. And therefore, these kind of behaviors are really problematic.
Okay, so we're going to take the last question. That is the gay panic defense and actual defense used in India? Does it have any legal backing? Is the gay panic defense an actual defense used in India? Does it have any legal backing?
I'm not the right person to answer that. I think you would need a lawyer to do that, and not me. You should get legal person to respond to that.
Okay, so ma'am, I'll be happy to tell you that we are getting a lot of positive responses, that students are very happy, the teachers are very happy. A lot of queries have been solved today. So with the permission of our Dean Law School and Law School, maybe proceed for the webinar, sir.
You're breaking up.
Okay, so I will be proposing the vote of thanks now. Firstly, I would like to propose a hearty vote of thanks to the distinguished speaker, Ms. Anjali Gopalan, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing time out of your busy schedule and delivering a very productive and knowledgeable address. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence. I would like to express my profound gratitude to our actuaries and sir for your model support and constant. I'm happy to express my vote of thanks to Ravi and Deepthi for the smooth conduct of the webinar. I mentioned my details and certification and would place on record my hearty thanks to all the student volunteers, Saurabh, Surbhi, Pragati, Smriti, and Pulkit for helping us. Finally, most important, I would like to thank the wonderful audience who have actively participated in the webinar and made it a grand success. With these message, we move to the end of today's webinar. And one thing more, I would like to mention the name of one of our law student, Vidushi, who has interned in NAS Foundation. And because of her, we got in, in connection with Anjali ma'am and James. I also like to thank James for always, helping us and linking us with Anjali ma'am. And we are continuing visiting the NAS Foundation and, continuing with lectures and webinars. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you
Thank you.
all.
All the best.
See you soon, ma'am, once the pandemic gets
Forward to
over.
it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank
Bye.
you, ma'am.
It's always a pleasure having you with us at DME.
It's really lovely being with you guys. I look forward to meeting the students once the college opens.
Absolutely, ma'am. We'll absolutely fix one of the session with you. And
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Lovely. Okay, take care, everyone, and
Thank
stay
you,
safe.
ma'am.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Participants can stay. You will fill the feedback form and the attendance form. Okay, so all of you, please hurry up in filling the